Hello, my good friends. How are you today? May God bless you all. I will not introduce anything. You guys watch the video and feel it, then let's evaluate together. The penthouse office, perched high above Manhattan, was a damn fortress of glass and steel, all sharp edges and cold ambition. Neon lights, red and gold, bled through the floor-to-ceiling windows, painting the room in jagged streaks that flickered like a heartbeat. The hum of the city below pulsed low, a bass line that never quit, drowned out only by the faint clink of ice in Alexander Grayson's whiskey glass. At 35, he was a walking contradiction, a real estate tycoon who'd built an empire from grit, draped in a tailored black suit that screamed power, but with eyes that carried the weight of a man who'd seen too much betrayal. His dark hair was swept back, just messy enough to hint at stress. His jaw clenched like he could bite through concrete. Across the room, Ellie Mae Carter stood with her arms crossed, her scuffed sneakers squeaking on the polished marble floor. At 22, she was a study in defiance, a black woman from Harlem, her tight curls spilling loose from a half-assed bun, her faded work uniform clinging to her frame after a grueling shift serving drinks at Grayson's luxury hotel. Her deep brown eyes didn't waver, even as Alexander's gaze cut into her like a knife. She'd been summoned here after hours. No warning, just a clipped "Mr. Grayson needs you, now." Her gut churned not from fear, but from the bone-deep certainty that men like him didn't notice women like her unless they wanted something. And that something was never good. "You're late," Alexander said, his voice low, smooth, like the rumble of a car you'd never afford. Ellie raised an eyebrow, shifting her weight to one hip. "I was slinging cocktails for your fancy-ass guests. Didn't know I was on your clock." His lips twitched, a flicker of something annoyance, maybe amusement before he set the glass down, ice rattling like a warning. He leaned forward, palms flat on his sleek black desk, his 6'2" frame casting a shadow that seemed to eat the light. "You're here because I've got a problem," he said. "And you're gonna fix it." She snorted, uncrossing her arms. "Me fix your billionaire bullshit? You must be desperate. Desperate's one way to put it." He straightened, his eyes narrowing, like a predator sizing up prey. "You know who I am." "Everybody does," she said, her voice flat. "Alexander Grayson, king of concrete and cash." "What's that got to do with me?" "Everything." He slid a manila folder across the desk, the paper hissing against the wood. "Open it." Ellie hesitated, her pulse kicking up. She stepped forward, sneakers scuffing, and flipped open the folder. Inside was a contract, pages thick with legal jargon. But the bolded title screamed, loud and clear, "Marriage Agreement." Her heart stuttered, her fingers tightening on the paper. She looked up, eyes blazing. "You're out of your damn mind." "Read it," he said, unfazed, like he was ordering a latte. She scanned the first page, her breath catching. The deal was cold. Brutal: marry Alexander Grayson for 6 months, play the perfect wife in public, live in his penthouse, and keep her mouth shut. In return, a 7-figure payout enough to cover her grandma Bessie's hospital bills, get her sister Tiana back on her feet, and maybe, just maybe, give Ellie a chance to breathe. But the fine print was a cage: no personal relationships, no leaving without approval, no fucking up his image. She'd be his tool, his fix for a problem he hadn't explained yet. She slammed the folder shut, shoving it back. "Screw this. I'm not your puppet." Alexander didn't blink. He stepped around the desk, closing the distance, his polished loafers silent on the marble. He stopped just close enough for her to catch his cologne sandalwood, sharp, like money and danger. "You're not a puppet," he said. voice dropping low. But you're not dumb either. Your grandma's drowning in medical debt. Your sister's one bad day from losing her kid. You really gonna walk away? Ellie's breath hitched, anger flaring like a match. You don't know shit about my family, I know enough. His eyes locked on hers, unyielding. But there was a glint calculation. Maybe respect. Sign it. Carter. You get your life back. I get mine. She wanted to slap him, to storm out and let his world burn. But the image of Bessie's oxygen mask, Tiana's tired eyes when she hugged her son, anchored her. She clenched her fists, nails biting into her palms. If I do this, I'm not your toy. You don't own me. Deal, he said, too quick, like he'd expected her to fold. He handed her a pen, its metal cold against her fingers. Sign. Her hand shook as she scrawled her name, each stroke feeling like a cut. When she looked up, Alexander was watching her, his face unreadable. Good, he said. Now we start. Start what she snapped, tossing the pen onto the desk. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he glanced at the door, where his father, Edward Grayson, a silver-haired man with eyes like razors, stood waiting. His presence heavy, like he owned the air. Edward, stay, Alexander said. She needs to learn the part. Ellie's stomach dropped. The hell does that mean? Alexander stepped closer, his shadow swallowing the neon glow. It means you're my wife now, on paper, and people need to believe it. His voice was calm, but his eyes were fire, daring her to back down. Kiss me. Her jaw dropped. You're fucking kidding. Do I look like I'm kidding? He tilted his head, a smirk tugging at his lips, but his eyes were dark, hungry. Edward's here to make sure it's convincing. The board's gotta buy it. So let's practice. Ellie's heart slammed against her ribs. She glanced at Edward, whose cold stare made her skin crawl. Then back at Alexander. That smirk was gone, replaced by something raw, like he was testing her and himself. She should have walked. Should have told him to shove his contract up his ass. But the money, Bessie's frail hands, Tiana's kid, they held her like chains. Fine, she muttered, stepping forward, sneakers squeaking. Let's get this over with. Alexander didn't hesitate. His hand shot out, fingers wrapping around her waist, firm but not rough, pulling her against him. The heat of his body hit her like a wave, his chest hard under his crisp shirt. Her breath caught as his other hand cupped her jaw, tilting her face up. The neon lights danced in his eyes, red and gold flickering like a storm. Don't half-ass it, he murmured, so low only she could hear. Make it real. Before she could snap back, his lips crashed into hers. It wasn't soft, wasn't sweet. It was raw, like he was claiming something he didn't understand. His mouth was hot, demanding, tasting of whiskey and sin. Ellie froze for a split second, her hands hovering. Then instinct took over. She grabbed his shirt, fingers curling into the fabric, pulling him closer even as her mind screamed to push him away. The kiss deepened, his tongue brushing hers, sending a jolt down her spine. Her pulse roared, drowning out the city's hum, the ice in his glass. Edward's sharp intake of breath. All she felt was the press of his hand on her waist, the scrape of his stubble against her skin, the way his breath hitched when she bit his lip, hard enough to say, I'm not yours. The neon glow pulsed behind her closed eyelids, painting their shadows on the glass, a tangle of defiance and desire. His cologne wrapped around her, woodsy and sharp, mixing with the faint sweat of her shift. Her body betrayed her. leaning into him, her fingers tightening on his shirt as the kiss stretched into something dangerous, something neither expected. She broke away first, shoving him back, her chest heaving, her lips tingled, her face burning. "That real enough for you?" she spat, wiping her mouth with the back of her hand. Alexander didn't move. His eyes locked on her, dark and unreadable. His shirt was wrinkled where she'd grabbed it, his breath uneven. "Yeah," he said, voice rough, like gravel. "That'll do." Edward cleared his throat, muttering something about discretion and slipping out, his footsteps sharp against the marble. Ellie glared at Alexander, her heart still racing. "Don't ever pull that shit again." He raised an eyebrow, adjusting his tie, but his eyes didn't leave her. "You signed the contract. Carter, this is the deal now." She grabbed her backpack from the floor, slinging it over her shoulder. "Then you better keep up. Grayson, I'm not here to lose." She stormed out, the elevator doors hissing shut behind her. The city's pulse swallowed her footsteps, but she could still feel his lips, his hands, the way her body had wanted more. She shook it off, focusing on the cold night air, the subway ride back to Harlem. She'd play his game, but on her terms. Back in the penthouse, Alexander stood alone, the neon lights casting sharp shadows across his face. He poured another whiskey, the ice clinking like a challenge. He'd expected her to buckle, to be another piece he could move on his board. But that kiss, damn, that kiss, it wasn't just convincing. It was a spark, and it burned deeper than he'd admit. He glanced at the contract, her signature bold and angry. This was supposed to be simple, a way to secure his empire, so why did it feel like he'd just lit a fuse he couldn't control? Ellie stepped into the penthouse the next evening, her duffel bag heavy on her shoulder. The place was a cathedral of glass and chrome, all sharp lines and no soul. The Manhattan skyline glittered below, a million lights mocking her with their promise of freedom. She dropped her bag by the door, her sneakers echoing in the silence. This was her cage now. For 6 months, she'd make it work for Bessie, for Tiana, for herself. Alexander appeared from the hallway, his shirt unbuttoned at the collar, a glass of something dark in his hand. He didn't speak, just watched her, his eyes tracing her like she was a poem he couldn't read. The air crackled, heavy with the memory of that kiss. "You settling in?" he asked, his voice deceptively casual. She met his gaze, unflinching. "Don't get comfy." "Grayson, I'm not here to stay." He smirked, taking a sip. "We'll see." She turned away, heading for the guest room, but his voice stopped her. "Ellie." She froze, her back to him. He'd never said her name like that, soft, almost human. She didn't turn around. "What, don't make this harder than it has to be." She laughed, sharp and bitter. Too late for that. She walked away, the door clicking shut behind her. But in the dark, with the city's glow seeping through the blinds, she knew one thing: Alexander Grayson wasn't just a problem. He was a fire, and she wasn't sure if she wanted to put it out or let it burn. The penthouse was a damn icebox, all glass and chrome, with a view of Manhattan that screamed money but felt like a trap. Ellie Mae Carter stood in the guest room, her duffel bag still unpacked on the too-perfect bed, its white sheets mocking her with their crispness. The city skyline glittered through the wall of windows, a million lights that seemed to watch her every move. She'd been here 3 days, playing Alexander Grayson's fake wife, and it still didn't feel real. The contract she'd signed 6 months as his prop to secure his empire hung over her like a noose. Her Grandma Bessie's hospital bills were paid. Tiana's rent was covered, but the cost was her freedom, and maybe her soul. She yanked her curls into a loose bun, her reflection staring back from the mirrored closet. Her faded jeans and old Nina Simone t-shirt looked like a middle finger to the penthouse's sterile vibe. She wasn't built for this fancy events, fake smiles, or the way Alexander's eyes followed her like she was a riddle he couldn't crack. That kiss in his office 3 nights ago still burned in her mind the heat of his hands, the way her body had betrayed her. Wanting more even as she shoved him away, she shook it off, grabbing her sneakers. She wasn't here to feel. She was here to survive. Her phone buzzed, a text from Nia Brooks, her best friend and the heart of Harlem's poetry scene. "Yo, you hittin' Soul Haven tonight. Need your words to light up the mic." Ellie grinned, her fingers hovering over the reply. Nia was her rock, the one who'd pushed her to spit poetry at open mics, who'd held her hand when Bessie's diagnosis came through. But before she could type, the penthouse intercom crackled. "Miss Carter," a sharp female voice. "All business. This is Jasmine Tate, Mr. Grayson's legal team. I'm here with your wardrobe." Ellie's stomach twisted. "Wardrobe?" She buzzed the woman in, and minutes later, Jasmine swept into the penthouse like she owned the damn place. She was tall, all sharp angles and flawless skin, her black blazer and pencil skirt screaming power. Her dark hair was pulled into a sleek ponytail, her eyes raking over Ellie with a smile that was more blade than warmth. A rack of dresses followed, pushed by a nervous assistant who bolted the second he could. "So, you're the new Mrs. Grayson," Jasmine said, her voice dripping with amusement. "Cute shirt. Very Harlem chic." Ellie crossed her arms, leaning against the counter. "What's your deal?" "Lady, I didn't ask for a runway show." Jasmine laughed, a sound like glass breaking. "Oh, sweetheart, you're not ready for tonight's event. Alexander's orders clean you up, make you look like you belong." She gestured at the dresses, all silk and shimmer. "Unless you want to show up in that thrift store vibe." Ellie's jaw clenched. "I'm not your sweetheart, and I don't need your pity dresses." "Suit yourself," Jasmine said, shrugging, but her eyes glinted with something sharp. "Alexander's got a lot riding on this. Fuck it up. And you're not just embarrassing him. You're done." She turned to the assistant, snapping her fingers. "Leave the rack. She'll figure it out." The assistant was gone in a flash, and Jasmine sauntered out, her heels clicking like a countdown. Ellie stared at the dresses, her reflection warped in their shine. She wasn't some doll to be dressed up, but the contract loomed 6 months. Play the part. She grabbed a deep burgundy dress, the fabric cool against her skin, and muttered, "Fine. Grayson, let's do this." The event wasn't some stuffy gala like she'd feared. It was a poetry slam at Soul Haven, Harlem's beating heart, a cramped bar with brick walls, red stage lights, and the smell of coffee and old wood. The crowd was alive, locals in hoodies, poets in berets, artists with paint-splattered jeans clapping and snapping as a poet spit fire on the mic. The air thrummed with soul music, a slow bass line weaving through the chatter, the clink of beer bottles, the hum of a city that never slept. Ellie felt at home here, even in the burgundy dress that hugged her curves too tight, her heels wobbling on the uneven floor. But Alexander was at her side, his black suit sharp as a blade, his hand brushing her lower back. The touch sent a spark through her, and she fought the urge to pull away. "Smile," he murmured, his breath warm against her ear. "They're watching." She gritted her teeth, forcing a grin. "You owe me big for this, asshole." His lips twitched, but he didn't reply. They moved through the crowd, his hand guiding her like she was his damn trophy. Poets nodded at Ellie, recognizing her from open mics. But their eyes slid to Alexander, curious, wary. She caught whispers. Who's the suit? What's he doing with her? And her chest burned. This was her world, her stage, and he was invading it. Then Jasmine appeared, her blazer swapped for a sleek red dress, her smile sharp as ever. "Alexander, darling," she purred, kissing his cheek, her hand lingering on his arm. "You look good in Harlem. And your wife?" She turned to Ellie, her eyes glinting. Bold choice, going for the street poet vibe. Ellie's fists clenched, but she kept her voice steady. "You got a problem, Jasmine?" "Spit it out," Jasmine laughed, sipping her wine. "No problem, just intrigued. Alexander's used to women with pedigrees, not poets from the block." Alexander's hand tightened on Ellie's back, his voice low. "Enough. Jasmine, she's here. Deal with it." Jasmine raised an eyebrow, unfazed. "Oh, I'm dealing. Just hope she can keep up." She glided off, leaving a cloud of perfume and tension. Ellie spun to Alexander, her voice a hiss. "What the hell was that? You let her talk to me like I'm trash." "She's nobody," he said, his eyes scanning the room. "Ignore her." "Nobody, my ass," Ellie snapped. "You think I give a shit about your elite friends? I'm here for Bessie and Tiana, not your ego." His gaze snapped to hers, sharp, unreadable. "Then act like it. Carter, this isn't your poetry dive. You're my wife tonight, so play the part, or this deal's off." Her chest burned, anger and humiliation twisting like a knife. She wanted to slap him, to walk out and let his empire crumble. But the thought of Bessie's insulin, Tiana's kid crying for his mom, kept her rooted. She swallowed hard, nodding once. "Fine, but don't expect me to like it." The MC's voice boomed, calling Ellie to the stage. Her heart lurched. She hadn't planned to perform. But Nia had slipped her name on the list. Alexander raised an eyebrow, surprised. "You're up," he said, his voice softer, almost curious. She didn't look at him, just stepped onto the stage, the red lights hot against her skin. The crowd hushed, the bass line fading to a low hum. She gripped the mic, her voice steady, and let the words spill a poem about Harlem, about roots deep as asphalt, about a girl who learned to burn without breaking. Her words were fire, each line a punch, her curls bouncing as she moved, the burgundy dress catching the light like a beacon. The crowd snapped, cheered, their energy feeding hers. She felt alive, untouchable, until she saw Alexander in the shadows, his eyes locked on her, intense, like she was the only thing in the room. When she stepped off, the crowd still roaring. He was there, waiting in the dim hallway behind the stage. His suit jacket was off, his shirt sleeves rolled up, his eyes dark with something she couldn't name. That was... He paused, searching for the word. Real. She crossed her arms, her breath still uneven from the performance. "Don't sound so shocked. Grayson, I'm not your prop up there." "I know," he said, stepping closer, his voice low, rough. The hallway was tight, the red lights casting a glow across his face, making him look less like a tycoon and more like a man. "But you're making this harder than it needs to be." Her heart slammed against her ribs, the air thick with the memory of their kiss. "You're the one making it crazy." she said, her voice trembling, pushing me, acting like I'm yours. He stepped closer, close enough that she felt the heat of him, the faint scent of sandalwood and sweat. Maybe I want you to be, he murmured, his hand hovering near her cheek, not touching, like he was afraid she'd bolt. The world tilted. The bass line thrummed through the walls, a slow, sultry pulse that matched her heartbeat. She should have walked away, should have shut this down, but her body leaned toward him, drawn like a moth to flame. You don't get to say that, she said, her voice shaking. Not after parading me like a damn prize. His hand moved, fingers grazing her jaw, slow, deliberate, like he was memorizing her. You're not a prize, he said, his thumb brushing her lip, sending a shiver down her spine. You're a fucking inferno. Her breath caught, and before she could think, she grabbed his shirt, pulling him into her. His lips crashed into hers. Not like the office kiss, this was deeper, hungrier, like he was starving, and she was the only thing that could fill him. The red lights pulsed, casting their shadows on the brick wall, a tangle of need and defiance. His hand slid to her waist, strong, possessive, pressing her against the wall, her legs parted slightly. His thigh brushing hers, the heat of him overwhelming. The kiss was a storm, teeth grazing, tongues tangling, her nails digging into his shoulders. His stubble scraped her skin, his breath hot against her neck as he broke away. Trailing kisses down her throat. Ellie. He growled, her name vibrating through her, raw and real. The sound lit her up, her fingers tightening in his hair. The wall was cool against her back, but his hands were fire, one sliding under her dress, tracing the curve of her hip. She arched into him, a soft gasp escaping, drowned by the soul music's bass and the frantic beat of her heart. The hallway's hum faded, leaving only the rhythm of their breaths, the faint creak of his shoes as he pressed closer. Her body burned, wanting more, but her mind screamed, "This is a contract, not real." She pulled back, breathless, shoving him away. "We're done here," she said, her voice hoarse, her lips tingling. Alexander didn't move, his eyes dark, his chest heaving. "Ellie, don't." She cut him off, straightening her dress, her hands shaking. "You don't get to do this. Not tonight." He nodded once, stepping back, his jaw tight. "Fair enough." She turned, heading back to the crowd, the music swallowing her footsteps, but the heat of his touch lingered, a spark she couldn't shake. She was in deep, and she hated it. Back at Soul Haven, Alexander stood by the bar, his whiskey untouched. The crowd buzzed, but all he saw was Ellie, her words on stage, her fire, the way she'd burned through his walls with that kiss. He'd pushed her too far, and damn, it felt like she'd pushed him further. This was a contract, a means to an end. So why was he chasing a woman who'd rather set his world ablaze than join it? Ellie caught a cab back to the penthouse, the driver's radio playing Aretha Franklin, her voice a balm against the chaos in Ellie's head. She kicked off her heels at the door, the burgundy dress pooling on the floor as she changed into sweats. The city lights mocked her from the window, but she ignored them. Curling up on the couch with her poetry journal, she hadn't written in weeks, not since the bills piled up. But her pen moved now, tracing lines about a man whose eyes held storms, whose touch was a poem she couldn't finish. She froze when the door opened. Alexander's footsteps were slow, deliberate, his shadow falling across the room. He didn't speak, just stood there, his suit rumpled, a bottle of bourbon in his hand. The silence stretched, heavy with everything they weren't saying. "You left," he said finally, his voice low, almost accusing. "Yeah," she said, closing her journal. "You got a problem with that." He stepped closer, setting the bottle on the counter with a soft clink. "You're good," he said, glancing at the journal. "Why'd you stop?" She stiffened, caught off guard. "Life stopped me. Not that you'd get it." He leaned back, studying her, the neon glow catching the planes of his face. "Try me." She wanted to shut him out, to keep her walls up. But something in his voice, tired, almost raw, made her pause. She hugged the journal to her chest, her voice soft. "It's not about stopping. It's about carrying too much to dream." He didn't reply, just watched her, the air shifting, charged with something unspoken. She stood, ready to bolt, but his hand caught her wrist, gentle but firm. "Stay," he said. Not a command, not a question. She pulled free, her heart racing. "Don't push me, Alexander. I'm not ready for whatever this is." He nodded, letting her go. Fair enough. She walked to her room, the door clicking shut behind her. But as she lay in the dark, the memory of his touch, his voice, the way he'd looked at her, kept her awake. This wasn't just a contract anymore. It was a fire, and she wasn't sure she could outrun it. The penthouse was too damn quiet, a glass tomb high above Manhattan's chaos. Ellie. May Carter sat cross-legged on the living room floor, her poetry journal open on her lap, charcoal smudging her fingers. The city skyline glowed through the glass walls, a jagged constellation of lights that felt like they were judging her. It was past midnight, and Alexander Grayson was still out, probably in some boardroom or bar, sealing deals with men who'd never know the weight of a hospital bill. She hadn't seen him since the poetry slam at Soul Haven 2 nights ago, since that kiss in the hallway that left her skin burning and her heart in knots. She'd told herself it was nothing, just the contract screwing with her head. But her pen kept tracing the sharp line of his jaw, the storm in his eyes. She ripped the page out, crumpling it. "Get it together." "Ellie," she muttered. Her phone buzzed. A text from Nia Brooks' girl. "You okay? You were fire at Soul Haven, but you dipped quick. Spill." Ellie's lips twitched, a faint smile breaking through. Nia was her anchor, the one who'd dragged her to her first open mic, who'd cheered loudest when Ellie's words set the room ablaze. But before she could reply, the penthouse door clicked open. Alexander stepped in, his tie loose, his dark hair mussed like he'd been tugging at it. He carried the faint scent of bourbon and city air, his suit jacket slung over one shoulder. His eyes found her immediately, and for a second, the room felt smaller, the air thicker. "You're up," he said, his voice low, rough, like he hadn't slept either. "Couldn't sleep," she said, closing her journal, her heart kicking up a notch. "You look like hell," he smirked, dropping his jacket on the couch. "Thanks. Rough night." She raised an eyebrow, standing, her oversized t-shirt slipping off one shoulder. "What? Your empire crumbling already?" "Something like that." He moved to the kitchen, the clink of a glass against the counter echoing in the silence. He poured bourbon, the amber liquid catching the neon glow from outside. "Want one?" She hesitated, then shrugged. "Sure." Why not? He slid a glass toward her, his fingers brushing hers for a split second. The touch was brief, but it sent a jolt through her, like a spark in a dry field. She took a sip, the burn grounding her, and leaned against the counter, watching him. He was different tonight, less guarded, his shoulders slumping just enough to hint at something heavy. "What's got you so fucked up?" she asked, her voice softer than she meant. He didn't answer right away, just stared at the city through the window, his reflection sharp against the glass. "You ever feel like you're fighting a war you didn't start?" She blinked, caught off guard. Every damn day, she thought of Bessie's oxygen tank, Tiana's late-night calls about her kid, the dreams she'd buried under bills. "But you're Alexander Grayson. What war's got you?" He turned, his eyes locking on hers, dark and unreadable. "You wouldn't get it." "Try me," she said, echoing his words from the other night, her voice daring him to let her in. He took a step closer, the bourbon glass dangling from his fingers. The kitchen was dim, the only light coming from the neon outside and the fridge's faint glow, casting gold streaks across his face. "My dad," he said finally, his voice low, like it cost him to say. "He built this empire, same as me. Thought he had it all: family, power, loyalty. Then he sold it out. Ditched us for a better deal. I was 16. Ellie's breath caught, her fingers tightening on her glass. "That's heavy." "Yeah." He set his glass down, his hand brushing the counter, inches from hers. "I swore I'd never let anyone fuck me over again. Built this." He gestured at the penthouse, the city from nothing. "But it's never enough." She studied him, seeing the cracks in his armor for the first time. He wasn't just a cocky billionaire. He was broken, same as her. "You think I don't get that?" she said, her voice quiet but firm. "My grandma's fighting to breathe. My sister's one bad day from losing her son. I'm here, playing your wife, because I got no other way to hold them together. You're not the only one at war." His eyes softened, just a fraction, and the air shifted, heavy with something unspoken. He stepped closer, close enough that she felt the heat of him, the faint scent of bourbon and cologne. "You're not like anyone else," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You don't break." She laughed, short and bitter. "Bullshit. I'm breaking right now, standing in your damn kitchen." "No," he said, his hand reaching out, hovering near her cheek, but not touching. "You're burning, and it's driving me crazy." Her heart slammed against her ribs, her breath shallow. The fridge's hum was the only sound, a low drone pulsing with her heartbeat. She should have stepped back, should have shut this down, but her body leaned toward him, drawn like a spark to kindling. "You're the one making this crazy," she said, her voice trembling, "pushing me, acting like I'm yours." His hand moved, fingers grazing her jaw, slow, like he was afraid she'd shatter. "Maybe I want you to be," he murmured, his thumb brushing her lip, sending a shiver down her spine. The world spun. Her glass hit the counter with a soft clink, her hands finding his chest, fingers curling into his shirt. He pulled her in, his lips crashing into hers. Not like the office or the poetry slam, this was deeper, hungrier, like he was drowning and she was air. The neon light pulsed behind her eyelids, gold and red blurring into a haze. His hand slid to her waist, strong, lifting her onto the counter, her legs parted, his body fitting between them, the heat of him overwhelming. The kiss was a tempest, teeth grazing, tongues tangling, her nails digging into his shoulders. His stubble scraped her skin, his breath hot against her neck as he broke away, trailing kisses down her throat. "Ellie," he whispered, her name a low growl, vibrating through her. The sound lit her up, her fingers tightening in his hair. The counter was cold against her thighs, but his hands were fire, one sliding under her t-shirt, tracing the curve of her spine. She arched into him, a soft gasp escaping, drowned by the city's distant hum and the frantic beat of her heart. The neon flickered, casting their shadows on the wall, a tangle of need and defiance. She pulled him closer, her lips finding his again, the taste of bourbon and him mixing into something addictive. For a moment, nothing else existed. No contract, no dichuk, no past, just them, burning brighter than the city outside. But then his phone buzzed, sharp and insistent, shattering the haze. He froze, his hand still on her back, his breath ragged. "Damn it," he muttered, pulling away, his eyes dark with frustration. He grabbed the phone from his pocket, glancing at the screen. His face changed, the softness gone, replaced by something cold. "Hard," what Ellie asked, sliding off the counter, her legs shaky, her voice hoarse. He didn't answer, just stared at the phone, his jaw tight. "Get your stuff," he said finally, his voice clipped. "We need to talk." Her stomach dropped. The hell does that mean? He turned, his eyes meeting hers, but they were different now, distant, guarded. "Naya sent me something. About Jasmine and my dad." Ellie's blood ran cold. "Nia. Her Nia. What about them?" she asked, her voice barely steady. "They're trying to take me down," he said, his voice low, venomous. "Jasmine's been working with Edward, my father, to flip the board. They want control of the company, and they're using you to do it." Her heart cracked, anger flaring over the hurt. "Using me? And you knew. You fucking knew and didn't tell me I didn't know the whole play," he said, stepping closer, his eyes narrowing. "I thought I could handle it, keep you out of it, but you—" He stopped, his voice breaking. "You're in deeper than I thought." Her hands shook, her voice rising. "You used me as bait in your damn war. You think I'd play along if I knew? Screw you." Alexander. His face didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Guilt, maybe, or pain. "I was protecting you," he said, his voice flat. "Get out. Now." She laughed, a jagged sound, grabbing her journal from the floor. "You don't get to kick me out. I'm already gone." She stormed to her room, shoving her clothes into her duffel bag, her hands trembling. Before she left, she tore a poem from her journal, the one she'd written tonight, about a man who burned too bright to trust, and left it on the counter. "Keep it," she said, not looking back. "Maybe it'll remind you what a prick you are." The elevator doors closed, the hum swallowing her footsteps. She didn't cry. Not yet. She'd save that for the subway, for Harlem, for the world that made sense. Ellie ended up at the Holy Light Church in Harlem, a small sanctuary where the air smelled of wax and old hymnals. The pews were empty, the stained glass windows glowing faintly under streetlights.
She sank into a back row, her duffel bag at her feet, and let the silence wrap around her. Nia was there, her braids tucked under a scarf, sliding a coffee across the pew. "You look like you just fought the devil," Nia said, her eyes narrowing. "What's up with Mr. Moneybags?" Ellie took a sip, the bitter warmth grounding her. "He's an asshole. Knew his dad and that lawyer bitch were playing me. And he didn't say shit. Kicked me out when I called him on it." Nia whistled, leaning back. "Damn, that's cold. But you're Harlem Fire. What's the plan?" Ellie stared at the coffee cup, her fingers tracing the rim. "I don't know. Bessie's meds are paid for now, but Tiana's still a mess. And me." She laughed, bitter. "I was dumb enough to think he saw me, not just the contract." Nia reached over, squeezing her hand. "He saw you. Ellie, that's why he's scared. Men like that, they don't know how to handle real." Ellie managed a small smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. The organ hummed faintly, a low gospel note curling through the air like a memory. She closed her eyes, seeing Alexander's face, the way he'd whispered her name. She hated him. She hated herself more for wanting him still. Back in the penthouse, Alexander stood in the kitchen, the bourbon bottle untouched. The poem lay on the counter, Ellie's words cutting deeper than any blade. "You burn like a star, but stars don't love. They consume." He'd fucked up. He knew it. But Nia's text, a screenshot of emails between Jasmine and Edward, had hit him like a sledgehammer. They'd planned to use Ellie's fake marriage to sway the board, paint him as unstable. He'd tried to shield her, but he'd only pushed her away. He picked up the poem, his fingers tracing her angry, looping script. "Damn it. Ellie," he muttered, his voice breaking in the silence. The city lights mocked him, their glow cold, empty. He'd lost her. And the truth clawed at him. She wasn't just a contract. She was the only thing that felt real in his world of glass and lies. Harlem's streets smelled like asphalt and fried plantains, a gritty comfort that wrapped around Ellie Mae Carter like a worn blanket. She stood outside her grandma's cramped apartment, the streetlights buzzing overhead, casting a dull orange glow on the chipped brownstone. It was 2 a.m., and the city was still awake, car horns blaring, a drunk guy shouting at nobody, the faint thump of hip-hop from a passing car. She'd left the Holy Light Church hours ago. Nia's words echoing in her head, "Your Harlem Fire." But right now, she didn't feel like fire. She felt like ash. Alexander Grayson's betrayal. Get Out cutting deeper than she'd ever admit. Her duffel bag slumped against the stoop, her poetry journal poking out, its edges frayed from too many nights of spilling her soul. She hadn't gone inside yet. Bessie would ask questions, and Tiana would see right through her lies. Ellie wasn't ready to admit she'd let herself fall for a man who used her as a pawn in his corporate war. She pulled her hoodie tighter, the night air biting her skin, and sank onto the steps. The concrete was cold, grounding, a reminder of who she was. Ellie Mae Carter, not some fake trophy wife. Her phone buzzed. A text from Tiana. "Where you at? Bessie's worried." Ellie sighed, typing back, "Outside. Be up soon." She didn't have the energy to explain why she was back, why the penthouse Alexander's sterile, glittering cage was no longer her problem. She leaned her head against the railing, closing her eyes, the memory of his hands on her waist, his lips on her neck, burning like a brand. "Fuck you, Alexander," she whispered, her voice swallowed by the city's hum. Inside the penthouse, Alexander stood in the dark, the neon glow painting jagged streaks across the glass walls. Ellie's poem lay on the counter, her words slicing through him like a razor. You burn like a star, but stars don't love. They consume. He gripped the bourbon bottle but didn't pour. The burn in his chest wasn't thirst. It was guilt, sharp and relentless. Ever since she'd walked out. He'd been a prick. He knew it. Letting Nia's text a damning screenshot of emails between Jasmine Tate and his father. Edward turned him into the kind of man he'd sworn he'd never be cold, paranoid, alone. He sank onto the couch, the leather creaking under his weight. The silence was brutal, broken only by the faint hum of the fridge, the same fridge where he'd lifted her, kissed her, felt her pulse under his fingers. He'd fucked it all up, trying to shield her from his father's game, only to push her straight into the fire. He picked up the poem, his thumb tracing her angry script. She'd really seen him, and he'd thrown it back in her face. "Damn it, Ellie," he muttered, his voice rough, breaking in the empty room. His phone lit up. A call from Edward. He ignored it. He didn't need another lecture about securing the board or protecting the legacy. The Dichuk, his father's twisted demand that he marry to keep the company, was a noose. And Ellie was caught in it. All he could see was her face, the fire in her eyes when she'd said, "Screw you, Grayson." He'd been wrong, and admitting it felt like choking on glass. Ellie woke to the smell of coffee and antiseptic, the hospital's fluorescent lights harsh against her eyelids. She'd crashed on the couch in Bessie's apartment, but morning brought a call from the nurse. Bessie's blood sugar had spiked, another bill piling onto the stack. Now she sat by her grandma's bed, the beep of the monitor relentless. Bessie looked smaller than ever, her dark skin ashen, her hands curled around the IV line, but her eyes, sharp as ever, pinned Ellie in place. "You look like you've been through hell." "Baby," Bessie said, her voice raspy but warm. "What's got you so tore up?" Ellie forced a smile, adjusting the blanket. "Just tired." "Grandma, work's been rough." Bessie snorted, weak but defiant. "Don't bullshit me." "Ellie, I raised you better. Spill." Ellie hesitated, her throat tight. She couldn't tell her about the contract, the penthouse, the way Alexander's kiss had made her forget who she was. "It's nothing," she said finally. "Just guy trouble." Bessie's eyebrow arched. "Guy trouble you since when? Since I was dumb enough to think he was different," Ellie muttered, her fingers twisting the hem of her hoodie. "He's a liar." "Grandma, thought I was part of his game." Bessie's face softened, her voice low. "Your daddy was a liar, too. Left us high and dry. But you're my fire, Ellie. If this man can't see that, he ain't worth your tears." Ellie nodded, her eyes stinging. But she didn't cry. She never did. Not in front of Bessie. "I know. I'm done with him." But she wasn't. Not really. The ache in her chest said otherwise, and it pissed her off. She kissed Bessie's forehead, promising to be back, and headed out, the hospital's cold air clinging to her skin. She needed to move, to work, to bury the hurt under something real. She picked up a shift at the diner, the greasy spoon where she'd slung plates before the hotel gig, the clatter of dishes, the hiss of the grill, the shouts of order up. It was her world, loud and messy, nothing like Alexander's sterile empire. Alexander stared at the boardroom table, the Manhattan skyline a gray blur through the tinted windows. His team droned on about shareholder unrest, Jasmine's latest pitch to stabilize the company with a merger. He barely listened, his mind stuck on Ellie's poem,
her voice cracking when she'd said, "Fuck you, Grayson." Edward, sitting across from him, cleared his throat, sliding a tablet across the table. "Jasmine's right," he said. "We need a new narrative. Ditch the girl. Stage a clean break. The board's spooked by your distraction." Alexander's jaw tightened, his hand curling into a fist. "She's not a distraction," he said, his voice low, dangerous. "She's not a prop either." Edward blinked, surprised. "Since when do you care? She signed the contract. Use her or lose her." Alexander stood, his chair scraping the floor. "Meeting's over," he said, his voice flat but final. He walked out, ignoring the stunned faces, his pulse pounding. He'd spent years bowing to Edward's games. But Ellie had changed the rules. Losing her wasn't just a business problem, it was personal. He ended up at a dive bar in Hell's Kitchen. Not his usual sleek lounges, but a hole in the wall with sticky floors and a jukebox spitting out Marvin Gaye. He ordered a whiskey, the burn doing nothing to dull the ache. His phone buzzed Jasmine, with a smug text. "Told you she'd bolt. Need a real partner." He deleted it, his thumb hovering over Ellie's number. He didn't call. He didn't deserve to. Ellie's shift at the diner stretched into the night, the fluorescent lights buzzing like a migraine. She wiped down tables, her arms aching, her mind replaying Alexander's face. The way he'd looked at her like she'd gutted him. She hated how much it hurt. How much she missed the penthouse, not the luxury. But the moments when he'd let his guard down, when he'd seen her. She was pouring coffee when her phone rang. Tiana's name flashing. "Ellie," Tiana said, her voice tight, panicked. "They're taking Jamal. Social services says I can't keep him back rent. No job. I fucked up." Ellie's heart stopped. "What? Where are you at the apartment? They're coming tomorrow." "Stay put," Ellie said, dropping the coffee pot, her hands shaking. "I'm coming." She grabbed her jacket, ignoring her boss's protests, and ran to the apartment, the city's cold air stinging her lungs. Tiana sat on the couch, her 4-year-old son asleep in her lap, her face streaked with tears. "I tried. Ellie," she whispered. "I can't lose him." Ellie's stomach churned. The money from Alexander's contract was tied up in Bessie's bills. They had nothing left. "We'll fix this," she said, her voice breaking. "You're not losing Jamal." The night was silent. Tiana's sobs the only sound. Ellie didn't sleep, her mind racing. She hadn't written poetry since the penthouse, hadn't let herself dream. The weight of it, Bessie, Tiana, Jamal. Alexander crushed her, and for the first time, she let herself cry. The sobs, quiet, swallowed by the city's noise. The next morning, Ellie dragged herself to the diner, her eyes red, her body heavy. She was flipping pancakes when Nia burst in, her braids swinging, her grin wide. "Girl, you gotta see this," she said, shoving a flyer into Ellie's hands. It was for Harlem Poetry Slam, a community event at Soul Haven. "They want you on the mic. Your name's on the list." Ellie frowned, scanning the flyer. "I didn't sign up for shit." "Someone did," Nia said, winking. "Bet it's your suit, playing ghostwriter." Ellie's heart twisted, hope and anger colliding. "Alexander," after kicking her out. "No way," she said, but her fingers tightened on the flyer. "He's done with me." "Then prove him wrong," Nia said, her voice firm. "Get on that stage. Spit your truth." Ellie stared at the flyer, the neon streetlights outside the diner casting a red glow across it. She didn't know if Alexander was behind it, didn't know if she could trust her heart not to break again. But the thought of poetry, of reclaiming her voice, sparked a fire she'd thought was dead. She nodded, tucking the flyer into her pocket. "All right," she said, her voice steady for the first time in days. "I'm in." Back in the penthouse. Alexander sat at his desk, Ellie's poem propped against a stack of contracts. He'd found the Harlem Poetry Slam flyer in his assistant's email, a favor he'd called in anonymously, a way to give Ellie something without begging for forgiveness he didn't deserve. He didn't expect her to show up, didn't expect her to ever look at him again, but as he stared at her words, her script staring back, he knew one thing he wasn't done fighting. Not for his empire, not for his pride, but for her. He picked up his phone, scrolling to her number. His thumb hovered, the neon glow outside pulsing like a heartbeat. He didn't call, not yet, but the fire she'd lit in him wasn't going out, and he'd be damned if he let it burn alone. The Harlem Poetry Slam at Soul Haven was a living pulse, a riot of voices, rhythm, and raw truth packed into a brick-walled bar. Red stage lights bled across the crowd, poets in snapbacks, locals in faded tees, artists with ink-stained fingers snapping and shouting as a performer spit verses that cut like glass. The air was thick with coffee, bourbon, and the low hum of soul music, a bass line that thrummed like Harlem's heartbeat. Ellie Mae Carter stood by the stage, her hands smudged with charcoal from nervous doodling, her heart pounding like a drum. She'd spent the last 3 days writing, pouring her rage, her hurt, her fire into poems that now sat heavy in her journal. Tonight wasn't just a performance, it was her reclaiming her voice, her stage, her city. She wore a black leather jacket over a burgundy top, her curls loose and wild, catching the light like a crown. The flyer had brought her here, a chance to be Ellie again, not Alexander Grayson's contract wife, but Nia's words. "Bet it's your suit." Playing ghostwriter gnawed at her. Was he behind this? And if he was, what the hell did he want? She pushed the thought down, nodding at a poet who clapped her shoulder. This was her night, her fight. She wasn't letting him steal it. The crowd swelled, their voices a chaotic hum over a Nina Simone track weaving through the speakers. Ellie was adjusting her journal when Nia burst through, her braids swinging, her grin wide as the Hudson. "Girl, you're about to set this place on fire," she said, pulling Ellie into a hug, ready to spit that truth. Ellie laughed, the sound rough but real. "Yeah, but don't jinx me. Still waiting for the mic to betray me." "It won't," Nia said, nudging her. "But heads up, I saw a slick-ass car outside. $10 says it's your man." Ellie's stomach flipped, her smile fading. "He's not my man," she said, but her eyes darted to the entrance, her pulse racing. She hadn't seen Alexander since she'd stormed out, since he'd hidden his father's plot and kicked her out like trash. The hurt still burned, but so did the memory of his lips, his hands, the way he'd whispered her name like it was a poem. "If he shows, he's getting an earful," she muttered. Before she could brace herself, the crowd parted, and there he was, Alexander Grayson, out of place in his tailored black coat, his dark hair catching the red stage lights, his eyes locked on hers, fierce and unyielding, like a missile finding its mark. The room seemed to shrink, the music fading to a dull roar. He moved toward her, slow, deliberate, the crowd's chatter falling away. Ellie's hands clenched, her nails biting into her palms. "What the hell are you doing here?" she said, her voice low, sharp. He stopped a foot away. close enough that she caught his cologne sandalwood, sharp, familiar. "I needed to see you," he said, his voice low, rough, like he'd been fighting himself to get here. "You saw me," she said, crossing her arms, her leather jacket creaking. "Now get out." He didn't move, his eyes searching hers, softer than she'd ever seen, but still burning. "I was wrong," he said, the words heavy, like they'd been carved out of him. "About you. About my dad. About everything. I fucked up. Ellie, and I'm sorry." Her heart stuttered, but she held her ground, her voice cold. "Sorry doesn't fix shit. Alexander, you used me. You lied. You threw me out like I was nothing. You're not nothing," he said, stepping closer, his voice dropping to a raw whisper. "You're the only thing that's ever felt real in this fucked up world of mine, and I was too damn scared to see it." The words hit like a punch, stealing her breath. The stage lights flickered, casting shadows across his face, making him look younger, broken. She wanted to shove him, to scream, but her body betrayed her, leaning toward him, drawn by the heat in his eyes. "You don't get to say that," she said, her voice shaking. "Not after what you did." "I know," he said, pulling a folded paper from his pocket, the contract, its edges worn. He held it up, his eyes never leaving hers. "This was a mistake. Not you, not us, but this." He tore it in half, the rip loud in the quiet bubble around them, and let the pieces fall to the floor. The crowd murmured, heads turning, but Ellie barely noticed. Her throat tightened, her eyes burning. "What are you doing?" she whispered. "I don't want a fake wife," he said, his voice steady now, raw. "I want you, Ellie, for real. No contracts, no games, just you." Time stopped. The soul music swelled, Nina's voice soaring, wrapping around them like a spell. Ellie's hands trembled, her heart a war between fear and want. She stepped forward, closing the gap, her voice barely audible. "You broke me, Alexander. How do I trust you?" He reached for her hand, his fingers warm, gentle, like he was afraid she'd break. "You don't have to trust me yet," he said. "Just give me a chance to earn it." The stage lights danced in his eyes, red and warm, and something in her cracked open. She didn't think, didn't plan. She grabbed his coat, pulled him into the shadowed hallway behind the stage, and kissed him. It was fire, fierce and desperate, her lips crashing into his, her hands fisting in his hair. He groaned, low and raw, his arms wrapping around her, pulling her flush against him. The world melted away, the crowd's roar fading, leaving only the thump of her pulse, the heat of his mouth, the scrape of his stubble against her skin. His hands slid under her jacket, fingers tracing the curve of her spine. Hot and deliberate. The red lights cast a hazy glow, their shadows merging on the brick wall, a tangle of need and forgiveness. Her breath hitched as his lips moved to her neck, a soft bite sending sparks down her spine. The music pulsed, the bass vibrating through her, matching the rhythm of their bodies pressed together. His cologne mixed with the faint coffee scent on her hands, a dizzying blend of him and her. And for a moment, nothing else mattered. "Ellie," he murmured against her skin, her name a plea, a prayer. She pulled back, just enough to meet his eyes, her chest heaving. "Don't make me regret this," she said, her voice fierce, her fingers still tangled in his coat. "Never," he said, his thumb brushing her lip, his eyes burning with something deeper than desire, something like love. They might have stayed there, lost in each other. But a sharp voice cut through. "Well, isn't this poetic?" Jasmine Tate stood at the hallway's edge, her red dress a slash of venom, her smile cold. The crowd's eyes turned, whispers rippling. "Alexander, you're making a fool of yourself." And with her, Ellie stiffened. But Alexander's arm stayed around her, his grip firm. "Walk away." "Jasmine," he said, his voice low, deadly. "This isn't your stage anymore." Jasmine laughed, her eyes glinting. "Oh, it's everyone's stage now. Check your phone, darling. I sent a little gift to the press. Your poet's fake marriage is the talk of the town. Good luck with that." Ellie's blood ran cold, but Alexander stepped forward, shielding her. "You're done," he said, his voice calm but lethal. "You want to play dirty? I'll end you." Jasmine's smile faltered, but she tossed her hair. "We'll see." She turned, her heels clicking, leaving a wake of tension. Ellie pulled away, her heart racing. "She's not bluffing," she said, her voice tight. "If this gets out, your company." "Screw the company," Alexander said, turning to her, his eyes fierce. "I meant what I said. Ellie, you're what matters." She stared at him, the weight of his words sinking in. The crowd was watching, phones out, but he didn't flinch. He took her hand, leading her through the chaos, out to the street where his car waited, the city's neon glow pulsing around them. They didn't speak, just climbed in, the leather seats cool against her skin. The driver pulled away, and Alexander turned to her, his hand finding hers. "I'm not running," he said, his voice low, steady. "Not from you. Not from this." She squeezed his hand, her throat tight. "Then don't. But this shit's about to get messy." He smiled, small but real. "Let it. I'm all in." They ended up back at the penthouse, the city's lights sprawling below like a promise. The air was heavy, charged. As they stepped inside, Ellie dropped her bag, her sneakers scuffing the marble. Alexander stood behind her, close but not touching, waiting. She turned, meeting his eyes, the stage lights from Soul Haven still dancing in her memory. "You sure about this?" she asked, her voice soft but firm. "No contract, no safety net. Just us." He stepped closer, his hand cupping her face, his thumb tracing her cheek. "I've never been surer of anything." This time, when they kissed, it was slow, deliberate, like they were writing a new poem together. The neon glow filtered through the windows, casting red and gold across their skin. His hands slid to her waist, lifting her onto the counter, the same counter where they'd first crossed the line. But this was different. No lies, no pretense, just them. Her fingers traced his jaw, his neck, memorizing the feel of him. His breath hitched, a soft sound that sent a shiver through her, the city's hum fading to nothing. They didn't rush, didn't need to. His lips found her collarbone, her shoulder, each touch a question, each sigh an answer. The charcoal on her hands smudged his shirt, a mark of her, of them. When they finally pulled back, breathless, he rested his forehead against hers, his voice a whisper. "Stay," he said. "Not because you have to, because you want to."
She smiled, her heart full, fragile but alive. I'm here, Alexander. For now, I'm here. They stood there, wrapped in each other, the city breathing below, and for the first time, it felt like enough. The Holy Light Church in Harlem glowed under the soft pink and gold of a Manhattan dawn, its stained glass windows casting kaleidoscope patterns across the worn wooden pews. The air smelled of wax and old hymnals, mingled with the faint sweetness of cornbread from a community breakfast in the basement. Ellie Mae Carter stood by the altar, her bare feet cool against the polished floor, a mug of tea warming her hands. She wore a loose flannel shirt, the sleeves rolled up, her curls spilling free, catching the light like a halo. It had been 2 weeks since the Harlem Poetry Slam, since Alexander Grayson tore up their contract, since they'd chosen each other over the chaos of his world. The memory of that night, his hands, his voice, the way he'd said, "I want you," for real, still hummed under her skin, a rhythm she couldn't shake. She glanced at the pews, where a few early risers were setting up for the day's gospel service, their laughter echoing softly. This was her Harlem, her anchor, the place that had held her through every storm. Bessie's hospital bills were still a weight. Tiana's fight for her son was ongoing, but for the first time in years, Ellie felt like she could breathe. She sipped her tea, the bitter warmth grounding her, and smiled. She was building something new, not just with Alexander, but for herself. The city woke outside, horns blaring, a distant siren slicing through the quiet. Her phone buzzed on the altar, a text from Nia Brooks. "Yo, you still kicking it with Mr. Suit Poetry for Power tonight? You ready to run the show?" Ellie grinned, typing back, "Hell yeah, save me a mic." Tonight was the launch of Poetry for Power, a community poetry series she'd created at Soul Haven, a space for Harlem's voices to rise. She'd scraped together funds from local sponsors, and Alexander had quietly matched them, no strings attached. It wasn't much, but it was hers, earned, not borrowed from his empire. Alexander's voice broke her thoughts, rough with sleep. "You're up early." She turned, leaning against the altar, the wood cool against her back. He stood in the doorway, his dark hair a mess, his gray hoodie and jeans a far cry from his usual suits. The dawn light caught his face, softening the sharp edges she'd once thought untouchable. "Couldn't sleep," she said, setting her mug down. "Too much on my mind." He crossed the room, stopping close enough that she felt the warmth of him, his bare arms inches from hers. "Good stuff or bad stuff?" he asked, rubbing a hand over his jaw, his eyes searching hers. "Both," she said, her lips twitching. "Poetry Slam tonight. Tiana's court date tomorrow. Bessie's got a new doc. And you," she trailed off, meeting his gaze, a smile tugging at her mouth. "You're a whole damn vibe," he laughed, low and warm, the sound wrapping around her like a song. "A good vibe." "I hope," he said, his voice teasing but soft, his fingers brushing her arm. She tilted her head, her curls catching the light. "Jury's still out. Grayson." He grinned, leaning in, his lips brushing her forehead, a gentle contrast to the fire they'd shared before. "Fair enough," he murmured, his breath warm against her skin. "But I'm working on it." Her heart kicked, a familiar ache blooming in her chest. She reached up, her fingers tracing the line of his collarbone, slow, deliberate. "You better," she said, her voice low, playful, but edged with truth. I don't do half-assed. His eyes darkened, a spark igniting, and before she could blink, he pulled her against him, his hands sliding to her waist, lifting her onto the altar's edge. The wood was cool against her thighs, but his touch was fire, his fingers slipping under her flannel, grazing her skin. She gasped, soft and involuntary, as his lips found hers, slow at first, then deeper, hungrier. The dawn light painted them in gold, their shadows merging on the stained glass, a dance of light and need. The kiss was a poem, each brush of his lips a line, each sigh of hers a stanza. His hands roamed, one tangling in her curls, the other pressing against her lower back, pulling her closer. The church's quiet hum faded, replaced by the rhythm of their breaths, the soft creak of the altar, the faint rustle of her shirt as it slid higher. She hooked her legs around his waist, her nails grazing his shoulders, leaving faint marks that felt like a claim. His lips moved to her neck, a soft bite sending a shiver through her. The sound of his low groan vibrating against her skin. "Ellie," he whispered, her name raw, reverent, like a verse he'd never forget. The pink light caught the sweat on his brow, the intensity in his eyes, and she felt it, the shift from desire to something deeper, something that scared her as much as it thrilled her. She pulled back, breathless, her hands framing his face. "Slow down. Poet," she said, her voice shaky but smiling. "We got time." He rested his forehead against hers, his breath ragged, a smile tugging at his lips. "Yeah," he said, his voice rough. "We do." They stayed there, wrapped in the quiet, the city waking around them. Her fingers traced slow circles on his chest, his heartbeat steady under her touch. It wasn't just physical. Not anymore. It was a choice, a promise to build something real. The Poetry for Power slam that night was electric. Soul Haven packed to the rafters with Harlem's heart poets, musicians, kids with notebooks, elders with stories. The brick walls vibrated with cheers, red stage lights pulsing like a heartbeat, the air thick with coffee and soul. Ellie stood by the mic, her black leather jacket slung over a chair, her burgundy top catching the light as she introduced the next poet. Her words were steady, her presence commanding, like she'd been born for this. She felt alive, grounded, like she'd finally claimed a piece of herself. Alexander was there, not in the spotlight but in the crowd, his hoodie blending with the locals, his eyes never leaving her. He'd insisted on coming, not to control but to witness, and when a young poet dedicated a verse to Harlem's queen, he clapped louder than anyone, a proud glint in his eyes. "You're a damn force," he murmured later, his lips close to her ear, the music swallowing his words from the crowd. She grinned, nudging him. "Damn right. Don't forget it." Nia swooped in, a beer in hand, her grin wide. "Look at you, running shit. Told you this was your stage." She glanced at Alexander, her eyes narrowing playfully. "You behaving?" "Suit," Alexander raised his hands, smirking. "Trying my best." "Good," Nia said, winking at Ellie. "Keep him in check." The night wasn't perfect. Jasmine Tate had made good on her threat, leaking a story to a tabloid billionaire's fake bride Harlem poets scam. Alexander's team had spun it as corporate sabotage. But the whispers lingered. When a reporter cornered them, asking about the poet who conned a tycoon, Alexander cut them off, his voice firm. "Ellie Carter's a poet, a leader, and the strongest woman I know. Write that." Ellie's heart swelled, her hand squeezing his. A silent thank you.
They weren't running from the world anymore, they were facing it. Together, later. They walked through Harlem's streets. The air cool, the streetlights casting long shadows. The city's pulse was softer here, a backdrop to the crunch of leaves under their feet, the distant hum of a gospel choir practicing late. Ellie wore Alexander's hoodie over her top, the fabric warm and heavy, his scent clinging to it. They didn't hold hands, didn't need to just walk side by side, their shoulders brushing, a quiet rhythm. I used to think love was something you had to earn, Ellie said, her voice soft, breaking the silence. Like you had to be enough, prove yourself. But now... She glanced at him, her eyes catching the light. Maybe it's just choosing someone who sees you. Alexander stopped, turning to her, his face half lit by a street lamp. I thought it was a game you played to win, he said, his voice low, honest. But you... He reached for her hand, his fingers lacing with hers. You make it feel like coming home. Her throat tightened, her heart full. She stepped closer, her free hand resting on his chest, feeling the steady beat beneath. Don't get all sappy on me. Grayson, she said, but her voice cracked, betraying her. He smiled, leaning down, his lips brushing hers, soft but sure. Too late, he murmured, kissing her again, deeper this time. The streets quiet wrapping around them. The streetlight flickered, casting a warm glow, their shadows blending into one. It wasn't a movie moment, just them, choosing each other in the mess of the world. When they pulled back, she rested her forehead against his, their breaths mingling. We're gonna crash and burn, aren't we? She said, half joking, half scared. Maybe, he said, his thumb brushing her cheek. But damn, it's worth a shot. She laughed, the sound bright, free. And for the first time, she believed it. They walked on, the city breathing around them, a new beginning unfolding with every step. Back at the penthouse, they didn't sleep. They sat on the floor, surrounded by Ellie's poems and Alexander's sketches for a community center tied to poetry for power. Their ideas spilled over like whiskey. She mapped out open mics. He drew a stage for Harlem's youth. At one point, he smudged charcoal on her cheek, and she retaliated, laughing, painting his nose with ink. They ended up tangled on the couch, her head on his chest, his fingers tracing lazy circles on her back, the dawn creeping in again. They didn't move in together. Not yet. Ellie kept her roots in Harlem, her room in Bessie's apartment, her nights at Soul Haven. Alexander still had board meetings, battles with Edward, the weight of his empire. But they made space for each other, her journal on his desk, his hoodie in her bag, their lives weaving together, verse by verse. One night, weeks later, Ellie found a note tucked into her journal. Write the world you want, not the one you survived. She taped it to her mic stand, her heart full. They weren't perfect, weren't promised forever, but they were real, and that was enough. Hey, what a ride. Did Ellie and Alexander set your heart ablaze? Hit that subscribe button and drop a comment to share your vibe.